At the dawn of the 21st century, comic books were in a weird spot. Still reeling from the market crash of the mid-90s, Marvel, DC, and Image scrambled to get things back on track, leading to huge editorial shifts, the emergence of new talent, and more ambitious creative directions. On top of all that, the September 11th attacks near the start of the decade cast a long shadow over all media, frankly, but certainly over superhero comics. Marvel and DC stories became more grounded and overtly political in a way that they hadn't really been since the 1980s. And while the 90s had been all about the art, big, expressive, some would say excessive, the comics of the new millennium were writer-driven, with cinematic pacing and naturalistic dialogue. Very much that modern style of storytelling that has endured until today, thanks to writers like Brian Michael Bendis, Mark Miller, Robert Kirkman, and lots of others that we're going to talk about today as we attempt to list the defining comics of the decade. Hey heroes, I'm Josh from Panels to Pixels, and these are the 20 most important comics of the 2000s. Before we begin, a few years ago, I put out a video like this for the 90s, the most important comics of the 1990s, and I used CGC submission data to inform that list. And a lot of you, quite rightly, pointed out that that was a flawed dataset, heavily weighted by things like speculation based on movies, and almost exclusively featuring big two superhero comics. Some of you pointed that out more nicely than others, I have to say. As I said in that video, important is a nebulous term. We could be talking about cultural importance, commercial importance, personal importance. The first appearance of Omega Red in X-Men issue 4 is a big deal if you're super into X-Men. But is it more culturally important than the creation of Hellboy? Possibly not. And I hold my hands up, my list did a bad job of reflecting that for the 90s. I think a more accurate title for that video would have been the most popular or the most collected comics of the 90s. But let's face it, nobody was going to click on that video, so I'm sorry. However, I did take your feedback on board. And so for this video, I've used multiple sources, including sales charts from the time, critical top 10 lists from the time in places like Wizard magazine. I looked at the Eisner Award winners for each year, and I've also just looked around at other people's collections. But more importantly, I have used my own brain, that's GI, genuine intelligence, and my decades of knowledge and experience as a comic book fan, reader, and collector to create this list. It will therefore include more indie stuff, more culturally important stuff, if you like, because that was the main complaint about the last video. And it's appropriate because the 2000s was really the decade where indie comics became mainstream. It's when I suddenly found my non-comics reading friends reading graphic novels for the first time. And I was like, hey, wait a second, I got bullied for this a few years ago. Anyway, all of those disclaimers out of the way, let's kick things off with number 20 on my list, Ultimate Fantastic Four, issue 22. Cover dated October 2005, this one is significant as the first appearance of Marvel Zombies. They travel to an alternative reality where all of your favourite Marvel superheroes have been turned into zombies. Written by Mark Miller, whose comics are going to appear a lot on this list, with art by Greg Land, this Marvel Zombies idea eventually spawned multiple miniseries, including the most popular one, which was written by Robert Kirkman, who, spoiler alert, knows a thing or two about zombie comics. So this is on the list because it was hugely popular. I remember seeing Marvel Zombies trades everywhere. It was one of the first things that would get put into your hand when you went into a comic book shop and you were looking for Marvel comics to get into. And again, it was part of that zombie revival of the 2000s, spearheaded by Robert Kirkman. And Marvel Zombies has now even become a TV show recently. In at number 19, we have 30 Days of Night, issue 1 from 2002. This is an indie comic created by Steve Niles and Ben Templesmith. It's a 3-issue vampire miniseries, and it features some incredible art. It's like this dreamy watercolor style with some black ink work over the top, and then I think there might be some Photoshop manipulation on the faces and things like that. It's very, very cool to look at, very surreal and creepy. And it was even adapted to a film in 2007. That's going to be a recurring theme on this list, is stuff getting adapted to films. But the reason I would consider it one of the most important comics of the 2000s is because it was the first title published by IDW. And IDW would go on to become one of the most significant comics publishers of the 2000s and even to today. When I think about the charted history of independent comics, you have the rise of the black and white indies in the 80s, and then in the 90s it becomes a bit more legitimate with companies like Dark Horse and of course Image Comics. But then in the 2000s, there is a lot more kind of prestige heaped onto these independent publishers. They start working with creators who are doing very ambitious stuff and a lot of it does get kind of mined for movies, and IDW were kind of right at the front of that. At number 18, we have Captain America issue 6 from 2005. I think this was volume 5, and it's part of Ed Brubaker and Steve Epting's legendary kind of redefinition of Captain America. Within that run, you have the death of Captain America, you have the Winter Soldier, and that's why this one's on the list, because it is the first appearance of Bucky Barnes as the Winter Soldier. This comic broke Marvel's #1 rule, which was you never bring back Bucky. Bucky stays dead. But obviously they brought Captain America's teenage sidekick back as a grimdark, badass, military villain turned anti-hero. It's a very cool story, very ballsy concept, and of course it's been adapted into the MCU as played by Sebastian Stan. Speaking of characters in the MCU, at number 17, let's do the Sentry issue 1, cover dated September 2000. Created by Paul Jenkins and Jay Lee, this is the first appearance of Robert Reynolds, aka the Sentry. This is a fabulous little miniseries with incredible art and a very compelling kind of meta-narrative, and perhaps what was most interesting about it was the whole marketing campaign around this comic, which included going to publications like Wizard and saying, hey, we found this character in a drawer somewhere who's created by Stan Lee back in the 60s. He predates the whole Marvel universe, and we've dug him out and we're going to put him in the comic, which relates to the narrative of the comic, which was that he was kind of the original Superman of the Marvel universe and has been forgotten by the entire universe. And trying to uncover the mystery behind that. It was really cool. Stan Lee did interviews where he, role played as if he had created this character, but of course he hadn't. He was an invention for the year 2000. It's just a really cool kind of augmented reality, kind of viral marketing meta narrative, very of the time. At number 16, it's Star Wars: The Clone Wars issue 1 from 2008. Published by Dark Horse, who produced a ton of incredible Star Wars comics in the 90s and the 2000s. This one tied into the Clone Wars movie and animated series, and was the first appearance of fan favorite character Ahsoka Tano in comic books. Ahsoka is arguably the most popular new Star Wars character since, 1983? There's a huge fandom behind the Clone Wars and this character specifically, but at the time, that first movie was a bit of an unknown quantity, and this comic had a very low print run, so it now commands a high price for collectors. Number 15 on our list is The Boys issue 1, published by Wildstorm under DC and cover dated October 2006. This is of course the first appearance of The Boys, created by Garth Ennis and Derek Robertson, and I think most fans would agree that the show improves on the comic in almost every way. The comic is very gritty, very gruesome, very edgy and try-hard, which was the style at the time. But if you're a huge The Boys fan, well, this is where it all started. At number 14, it's Batman issue 656, cover dated October 2006. This is the first mainline DC book that we're talking about on this list, and this is the introduction of Damian Wayne. The son of Bruce Wayne and Talia al Ghul, this is the character's first full appearance, although it calls back to an earlier out-of-continuity story called Batman Son of the Demon from 1987. But this issue, Batman 656, is part of the Grant Morrison run on Batman, with art by Andy Kubert and inks by Jesse Delpadang. So as I said, Damian Wayne is the son of Bruce Wayne, aka Batman, and would eventually become the 5th Robin. I don't know if this is still the case, because I don't really follow movie news nowadays, but I believe that this was going to be the basis for the DCU's Batman movie, right? They're going to do Batman and Damian Wayne as Robin. At number 13, unlucky for some, it is Why the Last Man, cover dated September 2002. This comic, published by DC under their Vertigo imprint, tells the story of Yorick Brown, the last surviving man on a female-populated Earth. But the reason it earns its place on this list of the most important comics of the 2000s is because it was the first creator-owned work by Brian K. Vaughan, who would of course go on to be one of the leading indie comics creators of the 21st century, thanks to his titles like Saga and Paper Girls. So if you're a BKV completist, you've got to have a copy of Why the Last Man. Another indie darling at number 12, we have Invincible issue 1, cover dated January 2003. And what can I say about this one? Created by Robert Kirkman with art by Corey Walker, this comic introduced us to Mark Grayson, aka Invincible, who's just your typical, normal, average teenager. Except that his dad is the most powerful superhuman in the world, Omni-Man. Invincible has obviously gone on to become such a huge success, a long-running comic series. It's been adapted to an animated show on Amazon Prime. It's hugely popular with Gen Z readers, as I understand it. It was a lot of people's introduction to superhero comics. But I think perhaps what makes this comic even more significant in the wider landscape of comics is that Robert Kirkman kind of single-handedly changed the direction in which Image Comics was going. From the purveyors of 90s schlock to later Bad Girl Cheesecake Factory into one of the most respected and diverse indie publishers of today. And so you might be surprised that Invincible issue 1 isn't higher on this list, but I think it's fair to say that Invincible's success was a slow build. It took years to gain the popularity that it has today. In fact, the original print run was extremely low, with a reported 10,800 copies ordered by retailers. As such, first prints of the debut issue can fetch a pretty penny, and Invincible 1 is one of the most valuable comics on this list. At number 11, another Batman key issue. This is Batman issue 635 from February 2005, otherwise known as the first appearance of Jason Todd as Red Hood. In what we have to assume is a case of parallel thinking, just a few months after Captain America's sidekick, Bucky, returned as the villainous Winter Soldier, so too did Jason Todd, the second Robin who was infamously killed off after a fan phone-in vote, return as Red Hood. This story, written by Judd Winnick with art by Doug Mahnke, has been adapted as an animated film and was also the basis for the Arkham Knight video game, no matter how much Rocksteady tried to pretend that it wasn't in the lead up to that game. No, the Arkham Knight isn't Jason Todd. Red Hood? Pfft, never heard of him. Alright, at number 10 is Hulk issue 1, cover dated March 2008. And you just knew I had to get some Hulk comics on this list. This is the first cover appearance of General Thunderbolt Ross as the Red Hulk, although the character wouldn't appear in the story until later issues. Devised by Jeff Loeb and Ed McGuinness, this issue also features the death of longtime Hulk villain Abomination. And aside from the fact that this Red Hulk storyline is one of the defining Hulk sagas of the 2000s, alongside stories like Planet Hulk and World War Hulk, the General Ross version of Red Hulk was, of course, recently adapted to film as played by Harrison Ford in Captain America: Brave New World. At number 9, it's Alias issue 1 from November 2001. And this is our introduction to Jessica Jones, formerly the superhero Jewel, who now works as a private investigator who specializes in superhuman cases. But also she's an alcoholic who says f*** a lot. Created by Brian Michael Bendis and Michael Gaydos, this crime noir superhero mashup was part of Marvel's Max line of comics, which was kind of an R-rated imprint of Marvel, and it made full use of being R-rated by opening up page 1, panel 1 with a great big F-bomb. Brian Michael Bendis is known for being a little bit edgy, a bit cringy, but Alias just really works for me. I think it's him at his very, very best. And between this and another title that we've yet to talk about yet on this list, Brian Michael Bendis would go on to redefine the Marvel House writing style, with these decompressed 6-issue story arcs and kind of snarky meta humor. So Alias was of course adapted to a Netflix show called Jessica Jones, and that was part of the maybe, kind of, sort of, but definitely not MCU canon, and it starred Kristen Ritter as the titular superheroine. And it apparently ran for 3 seasons, although all I really remember from that show was David Tennant saying, "Jessica!" over and over again in his Scottish brogue. That was one of my ADHD stims from a while, going, "Jessica!" For years, Alias has been the Marvel comic that I put in the hands of people who don't like superheroes. It's one that I read in the early days of me getting back into Marvel Comics as an adult, and it made a huge impression on me. I really like this one. You know, I should really pick up an issue 1 for my own collection, and this might be a good time to point out that if you watch my most important 90s comics video, I had the vast majority of those comics and I was able to show you them on screen. So apologies, you know, my collection skews very towards the 90s, so I don't really have any of these issues to show you. If you feel like that's missing from this video, I can only apologize, but I didn't want it to stop me from making this one. But back to the list, and at number 8 we have Civil War issue 1, cover dated July 2006. Created by Mark Miller and Steve McNiven, this 7-issue limited series was the blockbuster event of the 2000s. Again, just to give you a bit of my personal backstory, I'd fallen out of comics around 2003, and I got back into them around the time of the first Avengers movie. And for me, as it was for I'm sure a lot of people, this was the comic that people handed to you. The trade of this was in every bookstore at the time, and I have very fond memories of reading this one for the first time, even though, to be honest, it's not that great. A lot of the characters get mischaracterized. I'm thinking particularly of Captain America, who gets some very like aggressive, edgy dialogue that doesn't really read to me as Captain America. And you know, I mentioned at the top of this video about these kind of post 9/11 comics and feeling the influence of that creeping into a lot of these comics, and I would say none more so than this book. At the core of Civil War is this argument about whether national safety is worth the price of civil liberties, and that of course was like the big conversation in the wake of 9/11 and during the War on Terror. And you know, not to get too political, but there were people on either side of that debate, and this was at least an attempt to bring that idea into comics. However, it undermines that entire premise by not really getting that into it and then concluding it very rapidly at the end with Captain America going, yeah, I know that I'm on the side of freedom and liberty, but whatever. Anyway, maybe I'll make a full video on Civil War one day because I find it very interesting. But despite all of my qualms, this comic is so immensely readable and enjoyable in not a political way, but in just a turn your brain off big superhero blockbuster kind of way. And yeah, I have a real soft spot for this. It's my guilty pleasure comic, if such a thing exists, and it completely changed the way that Marvel did business in the 2000s and ushered in that event age of comics, which, you know, is still ongoing till today. Oh, and also, of course, it became an MCU movie. You're going to be sick of hearing that by the end of this video. So spinning out of Civil War, let's do number 7 on our list, Amazing Spider-Man issue 529, cover dated April 2006. And of course, the biggest mic drop moment from Civil War was Spider-Man revealing his secret identity. And this issue deals with the wake of that and the debut of the Iron Spider suit designed for Peter Parker by Tony Stark. It's always exciting to get a new look for Spider-Man, no matter how short-lived they always tend to be. And again, this one has been adapted into the movies. This issue is part of the legendary J. Michael Straczynski run on Spider-Man, which is held up to this day as kind of the greatest modern Spider-Man run, although this issue is from the back half of that run, which I would say is a lot more up and down. But anyway, at number 6, we have Young Avengers issue 1, cover dated April 2005. And this one is just packed with first appearances. You know, you've got the team first appearance of the Young Avengers, but within that you've got Kate Bishop, who goes on to become a bigger deal in the Hawkeye series. You've got Patriot, you've got Wiccan, who would go on to become a queer character with their own fandom, and you've got Hulkling, and most of these characters have been adapted into the MCU in recent years. In fact, there have been rumors for so long that the MCU was going to start shifting focus onto the Young Avengers, and they would become the A-team, and whether that will actually happen or not at this point, I don't know. It seems like with Avengers Doomsday, they're very much focusing on the old Avengers. Let's keep it moving with number 5. This is Wolverine The Origin issue 1 from 2001. Wolverine was arguably the most popular superhero at the time. He's up there with Batman and Spider-Man. They were kind of the holy trinity of comics. Wolverine, of course, had been huge in the comics in the 90s and with the animated series, and then Hugh Jackman just took him to a whole other level in that first X-Men movie. But ever since the character's debut in 1974, his origin story had been a mystery. In the early 90s, Barry Windsor Smith had tackled the character's time in the Weapon X program, how he got his adamantium skeleton, how he lost his memories. But here in The Origin, for the first time, we see Wolverine, real name James Howlett's formative years. Written by Paul Jenkins with art by Andy Kubert, this 6-part limited series was kind of controversial. I think a lot of fans didn't want to know Wolverine's origins. They liked the mystery that was kind of baked into the appeal of the character. But there was money on the table and Marvel couldn't leave well enough alone. and this comic ended up forming the basis, along with that Weapon X story from the 90s, for X-Men Origins Wolverine, the movie, which, you know what, I'm going to say it right here, is better than people give it credit for. I'm not saying it's good, but I like that movie, it's quite fun. Coming in at number 4, just missing a place on the podium, is The Walking Dead issue 1 from October 2003. Written by Robert Kirkman with art by Tony Moore. Again, this, along with Kirkman's Invincible, changed the course of Image Comics. So much so that Robert Kirkman would eventually be invited to become an Image partner, the first new partner since the company was created in the 90s. The Walking Dead, I would say, is the most successful indie comic of all time. The Ninja Turtles is the only thing I can think that comes close, just in terms of like how it's been adapted, how long it ran, and just the reach of it. We're talking about 11 seasons of the Walking Dead TV show, multiple spin-off shows in addition to that. There have been video games, and like I hinted at when we talked about Marvel Zombies, The Walking Dead, both the comic and the TV show, were chiefly responsible for reviving the zombie genre. People forget this now, but the zombie stuff was done. It was completely played out. In fact, I've heard, I think Robert Kirkman tell this story, that when he was pitching this comic to Jim Valentino or Eric Larson or whoever was in charge of publishing at Image at the time, you know, he said it was a zombie story, and they said, we're not doing a zombie story, it's played out. But Kermit said, oh no, there'll be a twist, there'll be a big reveal. And he just kept telling them there would be a twist. But there never was. He just wrote a straight up zombie story and just kept saying, just wait, you know, there'll be a big reveal. And it never came, and he proved them wrong because zombies were popular and The Walking Dead was a huge success. I kind of butchered that story, but anyway. At number 3, let's do Ultimate Spider-Man issue 1, cover dated October 2000. And hey, look, I can actually show you this one. This is one of the few of these comics that I have in my collection. This is Brian Michael Bendis and Mark Bagley rejuvenating and modernizing the Spider-Man mythos for the new millennium. And I've talked about this comic before on the channel. It's something that I didn't necessarily like at the time, but I've really grown to love the Ultimate Universe. It was hugely popular in the 2000s and the early 2010s, particularly with that new generation of readers that were growing up with stuff like Invincible. And of course, the world of Ultimate Spider-Man also gave us Miles Morales in the 2010s. But I guess to talk about Ultimate Spider-Man's wider significance to comics, again, this is where Brian Michael Bendis pioneered that decompressed storytelling style with the 6-issue arcs and writing for the trade. You know, whether you're a fan of that or not, this is where Bendis kind of perfected the art, I would say. By putting Peter Parker back in high school with high school problems and, you know, high school girlfriends and none of the baggage of being a 30-something married, separated, widowed, lost a child, had another child in an alternate universe, you know, all the nonsense that was going on with Spider-Man after 30 years. But most importantly, it laid the groundwork for the Raimi movie, which was a major stepping stone to getting us where we are today, where comic book culture and nerd culture has become the de facto culture. And this right here was the blueprint for that. It was the next evolution in making comics cinematic. In the number 2 slot, I have placed NYX, issue 3 from 2004. This is the first appearance in comics of Laura Kinney, aka X-23. Initially introduced as a young female clone of Wolverine, I'd say that X-23 was one of the most popular new characters of the 2000s at Marvel. And I specifically said first appearance in comics because I feel like it's not as known that X-23 didn't debut in the comics, but actually on TV in the X-Men Evolution cartoon show. Kind of like Harley Quinn in Batman the Animated Series, although everybody knows that Harley Quinn was created for TV. Now, I will say that this issue, NYX issue 3, is significant as the first comics appearance of X-23, but it's controversial amongst fans of the character. Written by Joe Quesada, who was editor-in-chief of Marvel at the time, with art by Joshua Middleton, this story is pretty grim. It's very edgy in a 2000s kind of way. Yeah, it's mature in ways that I don't even want to talk about on this show because the video will get demonetized. So a bit of a content warning for you there if you decide to go seeking this one out. And of course, I have to mention that this character was immortalized on screen by Daphne Keane in Logan, and then again in Deadpool and Wolverine. And, you know, who knows, again in the future, I'm sure we will see X-23 return. And finally, at number 1, I agonized over what should take the number 1 spot on this list. And ultimately, it had to go to Amazing Spider-Man issue 36, cover dated December 2001. This, of course, is the 9/11 tribute issue with that very powerful, striking black cover. It's like, how much more black could it be? And the answer is none. None more black. Again, this one is part of the J. Michael Straczynski run with art by John Romita Jr. And while it's not a first appearance, you know, it doesn't have huge status quo shifting ramifications for the wider Marvel universe, I've put it at number 1 because of what it represents. I talked at the top of this video about post 9/11 media, and you really feel that in comics. New York, of course, was the home of superhero comics. It's where they were originally published from, it's where most Marvel heroes are based, and it was the inspiration, the partial inspiration, behind DC's Gotham and Metropolis. And so, of course, the Marvel Universe was rocked by 9/11, and they had to do something, they had to reflect it in some way. In this issue, we see both heroes and villains take a moment to reflect, pay tribute, and really just ponder how something so tragic could happen on this scale. And you know, in hindsight, it's a bit hokey to look back on this and see like Dr. Doom there in the rubble, you know, a literal fictional terrorist wondering how this could happen. And a lot of people, you know, pick holes in this and go back on it. But you're thinking about it all wrong. This comic isn't supposed to be logical. It's a raw, human response to what had just happened like 2 months before this hit the stands. And if I can just get personal for a minute as we wrap up this video, I was like 9, 10 years old when 9/11 happened. And obviously I'm in England, so we weren't as directly affected by it, but obviously we were affected in a kind of geopolitical sense and in a security sense. And obviously, you know, I'm not going to get into all the politics of it, but we were drafted into the same war as America and everything like that. But I remember that day so clearly because it would have been in like the afternoon for us, and I was at school, and the teachers like combined all our classes and pulled the TV on the big stand on the wheels, and we watched the news coverage of it. And I think both towers had been hit by that point, but there was like, you know, just constant rolling footage of the towers and everything, and it was so shocking for me at that age, because it was the first time that I like had this like palpable sense of fear in the room from the adults, and seeing this thing that I couldn't even like comprehend happening because I was so young. And you know, I'd seen the kind of thing in movies and stuff like that, but it was like, I don't know what point I'm driving at here exactly, but I've talked to other people my age, and there is this sense of like shared generational trauma here around 9/11. And I've also talked to people my age who, like me, are kind of obsessed with watching 9/11 documentaries. It's like for our parents' generation, they would watch, you know, all dads would watch World War II documentaries. I think that dads of my age are all going to watch 9/11 documentaries. It just feels like this monumental like loss of innocence for me at that age. And my wife and I went to New York a few years ago on our honeymoon, and we weren't even going to do the 9/11 museum, but we did end up going. And I just like, wept, man. It just really like, it got at something really deeply ingrained in me. And it wasn't long after we were there, actually, that my wife bought me this copy of this, because I told her about this comic. And it just, I don't know, this book just means something to me. It's very... it transcends superhero comics, I think. And so I hope that's justification enough for making it #1 on this list. I know you're going to disagree with me. I know there's going to be lots of disagreement about this list and the specific ranking. And why didn't you mention this? Why didn't you mention this? And hey, let me know in the comments below, but don't be a dick about it. At the end of the day, we're all here for the love of comics. And in that vein, I'd like to invite you to check out my last video about a comics character that I love from the late 90s. It's the strangest X-Man of all, Maggot. That's a video I'm really proud of. It didn't reach as wide an audience as I'd hoped, so I highly recommend going and checking it out if you haven't already. So click that video on screen now, and I'll see you over there.